Kai did not run. The German Shepherd mix, a silent shadow of scarred loyalty, was a creature of discipline forged in the same quiet crucible as his master. But today, he ran. The leash snapped taut, a leather exclamation point against the silent woods, and then went slack as the clasp gave way. Jacob watched, frozen not by surprise but by a sudden, hollow dread, as the dog bolted from the trail, a brown and black streak vanishing into the dense hemlock. He didn't bark, didn't look back. It was a flight with a purpose, a mission, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. Jacob followed, his long legs eating up the ground, the familiar rhythm of his stride a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in his chest. He called the dog's name, his voice swallowed by the indifferent green. He pushed through grasping branches, the sharp scent of pine filling his lungs, his mind a whirlwind of disastrous possibilities. For 2 years since leaving the dust and din of the service, Kai had been his only anchor, a steady presence in the suffocating quiet of his self-imposed exile. The thought of losing him was a physical blow. He finally broke through a thicket of wild rhododendron into a small, unnaturally still clearing. And there he saw it. An old school bus, rust-eaten and tilting, its tires long surrendered to the forest floor. It was half swallowed by the earth, vines creeping up its faded yellow flanks like green veins. Kai was at the door, whining softly, his body tensed not with aggression, but with a strange, pleading urgency. He pawed at the rusted metal, his claws making a scratching sound that echoed in the cathedral silence of the woods. Jacob approached slowly, his combat-honed senses on high alert. This was wrong. A bus this deep in the forest, miles from any road, was more than an anomaly, it was a secret. The air inside the bus was thick with the smell of decay and forgotten time. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the grimy windows. Most of the seats had been ripped out, leaving a wide, open space. At the back, a makeshift living area had been constructed, a simple cot, a small table, and a camping stove. It was a hermit's den, a ghost ship run aground in a sea of trees. Kai padded past Jacob, his nails clicking on the metal floor, and went straight to a small, steel footlocker tucked beneath the cot. He nudged it with his nose, then looked back at Jacob, his amber eyes filled with an intelligence that went beyond mere animal instinct. It was the same look he'd given Jacob in the lonely hours before dawn, when the nightmares came. A look that said, "I am here. See what I see." Jacob knelt, his knee protesting on the cold floor. The locker was heavy, and secured with a thick padlock. A prickle of unease ran down his spine. This was not his place, this was a trespass on someone's sorrow. Yet Kai was insistent, whining again, a low thrum of sound that vibrated through the floor. The dog's certainty overrode his own hesitation. He returned to his cabin for a pry bar, the short journey feeling like a pilgrimage between two worlds. The lock groaned, resisted, then snapped with a sharp crack that sounded like a breaking bone. Jacob lifted the heavy lid. His breath caught in his throat. It was filled with money. Neat, tight stacks of $100 bills, bound by simple paper bands. A quick, disbelieving count suggested a fortune, something close to $1 million. It was an impossible, life-altering sum. Beneath the money, almost hidden, was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with handling. Jacob lifted it out. The money was a shock, a jolt of pure adrenaline, but the journal felt sacred. It felt like the heart of the mystery, the reason Kai had brought him here. He could take the money and disappear. Buy a new life, a place where the ghosts of his past couldn't find him. It was the ultimate escape. But as he looked from the silent stacks of cash to the dog watching him with unwavering faith, he felt the weight of a choice he didn't yet understand. He opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was neat, precise, but bore the faint tremor of a man holding himself together by sheer force of will. "My name is Elias Vance," it began. "And I am a thief." Jacob sat on the steps of his small cabin, the journal open in his lap, the forest a silent witness. He read for hours as the sun arced across the sky, its light filtering through the canopy. Elias Vance's story unspooled, not as a confession of greed, but as a lament of profound failure. He had not been a common criminal. He was a partner in a small, successful construction firm, a business he'd built from the ground up with his best friend, Samuel. The money in the box was not stolen in a conventional sense, it was the result of a single, catastrophic error in judgment. A desperate investment, a shortcut meant to secure their family's futures, had gone horribly wrong, leveraging the company to the brink of ruin. Panicked and ashamed, Elias had liquidated the last of their shared assets, the $1 million, and run. He hadn't done it to enrich himself, but to hide from the face of the man he had betrayed. The journal was a litany of regret. "I see Samuel's face in my sleep," one entry read. "The trust in his eyes, the easy laugh we used to share. I have murdered that man, the friend he thought I was. This money is a cancer. It was meant to be a shield, but it has become a cage." Jacob felt a cold dread creep into his own soul. He understood cages. His cabin, the woods, the silence, they were the bars of his own making. He'd come here to escape the echoes of explosions and the faces of the men he couldn't save. He, too, had run from a failure he couldn't face. Elias wrote of his daughter, Lily. He'd left her and his wife without a word, believing his absence was a strange, twisted form of protection from his disgrace. He wrote of her 9th birthday passing, then her 10th. "Does she think of me as a monster? It is better than her knowing I am a coward." Jacob closed the journal, the leather cool against his skin. The $1 million in his shed was no longer a windfall. It was an anchor, dragging a dead man's soul down into the abyss. And now, it was chained to him. That night, sleep offered no refuge. He dreamt of the bus, but he was the one inside, the door rusted shut, his hands stained with the dust of old money. He woke with a start, Kai's wet nose on his cheek, the dog's quiet presence a question he couldn't answer. The next morning, Jacob drove his old truck into the small, sleepy town nestled in the valley below his mountain retreat. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed perspective. He found himself standing outside Abernathy's Hardware, a place that seemed as old as the mountains themselves. The owner, Mr. Abernathy, was a quiet man in his 70s, a Marine veteran of a war fought long before Jacob was born. He moved with a gentle deliberation, his hands, though gnarled with age, still sure and capable. Jacob picked up a box of nails he didn't need. He lingered by the counter, the silence stretching between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice feeling rusty. "Mr. Abernathy," he began, not looking the old man in the eye. If he found something. Something that belonged to someone who's gone. Something that could change his life," he trailed off, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Mr. Abernathy finished polishing a brass hinge, his movements unhurried. He set it down carefully before turning his clear, pale eyes to Jacob. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough of the world to recognize the shape of a moral crossroads. "Some things we find aren't for us to keep, son," he said, his voice a soft, gravelly rumble. "They're for us to carry. A burden isn't a curse if you carry it to the right place." He paused, looking out the front window toward the distant peaks. "A long time ago, I had to deliver a letter from a boy in my platoon to his folks. Hardest walk I ever made. Could have thrown it away. Told myself they were better off not knowing the details. But his last words were a promise I made. You don't break a promise to the dead. It's bad for the soul." Jacob stood there, the weight of the unspoken truth settling in his chest. He hadn't made a promise to Elias Vance, but Kai had led him to that bus for a reason. He was no longer just a finder, he was a witness. He was the last man on earth who knew Elias's final wish. He bought the nails, the transaction feeling absurdly normal. As he left, Abernathy called after him. "Jacob. Whatever it is, carrying it right will make you stronger. Running from it just makes it heavier." The old man's wisdom was a compass point, swinging slowly, inexorably, toward a path Jacob did not want to take. Returning to the cabin, Jacob felt a new, unwelcome sense of being watched. As he turned onto the dirt track leading to his property, he saw a dusty pickup parked near his gate. A man was leaning against it, arms crossed. It was Riggs, a local who made a living doing odd jobs and spreading gossip. He had a sour, suspicious nature and had made it clear he didn't care for the reclusive veteran living up the mountain. "Saw you poking around that old wreck in the woods the other day," Riggs said, his voice oily with insinuation. "Funny thing to find way out here. Wonder what a man might hide in a place like that." Jacob's body went rigid. His training screamed at him to neutralize the threat, to shut the man down. But he held himself in check, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Just exploring," Jacob said, his tone flat and cold. "The dog found it," Riggs smirked, his eyes darting from Jacob to the cabin and back again. "Right. The dog. You find anything interesting?" The question hung in the air, thick with greed. Riggs was fishing, sniffing around the edges of a secret he could feel but not see. "Just rust and mice," Jacob replied, walking past him toward the cabin. "You're trespassing, Riggs." Riggs held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just being neighborly. A man alone up here, people start to wonder. You be careful, friend. Woods are full of secrets. Some are best left buried." He got in his truck and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and a fresh layer of poison in the air. The encounter solidified Jacob's turmoil. The money was no longer just a moral dilemma, it was a physical danger. Riggs would be back. His type always came back. That evening, Jacob returned to the journal, searching for an answer. He read about Lily again, about Elias's aching desire to see her one more time. In an entry dated just a few months after his arrival, Elias wrote about a small book of poetry he kept. "I've tucked her school picture inside. The one where she's missing a front tooth and smiling like the sun itself. Sometimes, I take it out and pretend I'm a man worthy of that smile." Driven by a new urgency, Jacob went back to the bus, Kai at his heels. The place felt different now, more tomb than hideout. He found the book of poems, its pages swollen with moisture. And there, tucked between verses about loss and hope, was the photograph. A little girl, 7 or 8, grinning a gappy, joyful smile straight at the camera. Her eyes were bright with a life that knew nothing of betrayal or shame. Holding the faded image, Jacob felt the last of his defenses crumble. This wasn't about a dead man's money anymore. It was about this little girl, now a woman, who believed her father was a monster. That night, the sky broke open. A storm, savage and biblical, slammed into the mountain. Wind howled through the trees, a sound like a grieving giant. Rain came down in solid sheets, turning the world outside his window into a churning, liquid darkness. The power flickered and died, plunging the cabin into a thick, oppressive blackness broken only by searing flashes of lightning. In the thunder's violent percussion, Jacob heard the concussive whump of explosions, the shouts of men, the soundtrack of his own failure. His breath grew short, his heart hammering against his ribs. The cabin, his sanctuary, had become a trap. The storm was inside him now, tearing him apart. He saw the money in his mind's eye. $1 million. He could take it, wait for the storm to pass, and be gone before Riggs could get any closer. He could drive west until the mountains turned to desert. No one would ever find him. He would be safe. He would be free. But the image of Lily's smiling face superimposed itself over the stacks of cash. He saw Mr. Abernathy's steady gaze. A burden isn't a curse if you carry it to the right place. The wind tore at the roof, and a loud crack, like a rifle shot, echoed from the woods. He was shaking, the cold sweat of fear mingling with a deeper, more profound agony. He was a medic. His job had been to save people, to carry them from the battlefield. But he had failed. He carried the ghosts of the fallen every single day. He couldn't save them. Maybe he could save Elias Vance. He stumbled through the dark, found a lantern, and with trembling hands, lit the wick. The small flame pushed back the shadows. He opened the journal to the last page. The handwriting was different now, shaky but resolute. The final entry was dated October 12, 6 years ago. "The first snow is on the peaks," Elias had written. "I cannot face another winter alone with this guilt. Tomorrow, I am going back. I don't know if Samuel will have me arrested or simply turn his back on me. I don't know if Lily will ever forgive me. But I cannot let my story end here, in this metal coffin, a coward who ran from the only people he ever loved. I will give back what I took. Maybe it's not enough. But it is all I have left to give. I will walk out of these woods a free man, one way or another. I pray God gives me the strength to face them." There were no more entries. Jacob stared at the words, the final testament of a man who had found his courage too late. Elias had made his choice. He had decided to walk out, to face his judgment. But he never made it. He was still out there, somewhere in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. The storm raged, but the tempest inside Jacob had begun to calm. A profound clarity settled over him. The path was no longer murky. It was a straight, hard line. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just carrying a dead man's money. He was carrying his final act of redemption. As the first hint of gray light touched the horizon, the storm broke. The wind died down to a whisper, and the rain softened to a gentle patter. It was over. Jacob went to the shed. He pulled out a sturdy canvas duffel bag and began packing the money, stack by tight stack. He placed the journal and the small photograph of Lily carefully on top. He worked with a quiet, focused efficiency he hadn't felt since he'd worn a uniform. Every movement was precise, purposeful. This was a mission. He pulled on his sturdy hiking boots, filled a canteen, and slung the heavy bag over his shoulder. Kai stood by the door, his tail giving a slow, steady thump against the floor. The dog's anxious energy was gone, replaced by the same calm resolve that now filled Jacob. It was as if the animal had known all along what the conclusion must be. He'd simply been waiting for his human to catch up. Jacob stepped out of the cabin into the clean-washed air of the new morning. The world smelled of wet earth and pine. A massive pine tree had fallen across the dirt track, its tangled roots ripped from the ground. His truck was useless. He was blocked in, but for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel trapped. He looked at the fallen tree, then at the mountain trail leading down into the valley. He would walk. He adjusted the heavy bag on his shoulder, the weight a grounding, solid presence. "Come on, Kai," he said softly. The dog trotted ahead, leading the way. The journey down the mountain was arduous. The trail was slick with mud and littered with fallen branches. But with every step, Jacob felt a layer of his own isolation sloughing off. He was no longer hiding. He was moving towards something. He was a messenger, a conduit for a forgiveness sought 6 years too late. Using the details from the journal, the name of the company, Vance and Son Construction, and the town where they'd lived, Jacob found his way. It took 2 days of walking, a bus ride, and hitching a lift with a trucker who talked ceaselessly about the weather. He arrived in a small, tidy town in the next state, a place of neat houses and old brick storefronts. He found Vance and Son Construction in a small industrial park on the edge of town. The sign was faded, the Vance part painted over, but the ghost of the letters was still visible beneath. The business was now just Marshall Construction, Samuel Marshall. He took a deep breath, the heavy bag a tangible reminder of his purpose. He walked into the small, cluttered office. An older man with a deeply lined face and weary eyes looked up from a stack of invoices. He was broad-shouldered, with the powerful hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tired. "I'm looking for Samuel Marshall," Jacob said. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm Samuel." At that moment, a woman entered from a back room, carrying a mug of coffee. She was in her late 20s, with the same bright, intelligent eyes from the photograph, though they now held a guarded, world-weary light. "Dad, the foreman for the school job is online too." She stopped when she saw Jacob, her gaze taking in his dusty clothes and the heavy duffel bag. It was Lily. Jacob stood before them, the last two people Elias Vance had loved and betrayed. The air in the small office was thick with unspoken history. He felt like an intruder on a private grief that had festered for years. He could see the struggle in the worn-out equipment in the yard, in the worry etched on Samuel's face. He gently lowered the duffel bag to the floor. He didn't offer a clumsy explanation or a long story about himself. His own history had no place here. He was merely a vessel. He unzipped the bag and turned it so they could see the contents. Samuel's eyes widened in disbelief. Lily let out a small, sharp gasp. Then, Jacob reached in and pulled out the worn leather journal and the small, faded photograph. He held them out to Lily. "He wanted you to have these," Jacob said, his voice quiet but clear. "He wrote it all down. He was coming back." Lily stared at him, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, shock, and a dawning, painful hope. Her hand trembled as she took the journal. Samuel stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the money, then on Jacob's face, searching for a trick, a catch. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "It doesn't matter," Jacob replied softly. "I found him. Or what he left behind. He wanted to make it right." He didn't mention the bus, or his dog, or the storm that had broken him open. He simply delivered the message. He had carried the burden to the right place. He zipped up the bag, leaving it on the floor. "It's all there," he said. Then, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving the father and daughter with the ghost who had finally come home. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for thanks. His mission was complete. The act itself was the reward. The crushing weight he had carried for years, the ghosts of his own past, felt lighter, as if in carrying Elias's burden, he had set down some of his own. As he walked away from the town, the setting sun casting long shadows behind him, a car pulled up alongside him. It was Lily. She rolled down the window, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. She had been reading the journal. "Wait," she called out. Jacob stopped, but didn't turn around. "My father, the last entry said he was coming home. He died out there, didn't he?" "I think he died trying," Jacob said, the words feeling true and right. There was a long silence. He could feel her studying him, trying to understand the man who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. "He didn't send you," she said, her voice soft with a sudden, profound realization. "God sent you." Jacob finally turned to look at her. He saw in her face not just gratitude, but a shared understanding of loss and the long, difficult road to peace. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that passed between two strangers who were no longer strangers. He didn't need to say anything else. He continued walking, and she didn't follow. The journey back to his mountain was different. The silence in his cabin was no longer suffocating, it was peaceful. The woods were not a place to hide, but a sanctuary. He and Kai resumed their walks, but now they moved with an easy, unburdened rhythm. Jacob had descended into another man's hell and emerged with a piece of his own salvation. He had given away a fortune, but he had received something far more valuable in return, a purpose. He had faced the world not as a soldier or a victim, but as a man who chose service over solitude, and redemption over regret. Weeks later, a letter arrived. It was from Lily. It wasn't long. It simply said that the money had saved the business, and that she and Samuel had found a kind of peace. She had enclosed a new photograph, a recent one of her and her father, standing together, smiling. At the bottom, she had written a single sentence. "Thank you for bringing my father home." Jacob placed the letter and photo on the mantelpiece. He looked around the small cabin, no longer a prison but a home. He stepped outside, Kai at his side, and breathed in the crisp mountain air. The journey was over, but his life was just beginning. The path ahead was still his own, but he would not walk it alone, and he would no longer walk it in darkness.